And let me remember to share. Okay, let me remember to record. Okay. So I am at the Region 5 of the NNLM. My pronouns are she and her. And I will be hosting this session along with some colleagues. So we have Maddie Romancic. She is also from the Region 5 NNLM. She is assisting with some technical aspects of this session. And we also have another R5 colleague, Carolyn Martin, who's going to be monitoring the chat. So just to note that this webinar series is a collaboration between NNLM Region 5 and the Pacific Northwest chapter of the Medical Library Association. Before I introduce our speaker, I'm just going to go through just a few kind of technical items before we start. We've muted everyone as they join the webinar, and we ask that you stay muted throughout the presentation. We welcome comments and questions in the chat box, so please feel free and put those in the chat at the bottom of your screen. And make sure if you're asking a question that you're making them go to everybody, not just the hosts. So this way, everyone can see the questions that you have. We have enabled live captioning for this event. You can access those captions by clicking on the icon with the 3 dots and then selecting closed caption. And a note about CE: for attending today's session, you are eligible for 1 MLA CE credit. So please stay on the webinar. At the end of the session, we will have information about how you can claim that credit. And just a kind of friendly reminder, whether or not you want CE credit or not, we really appreciate you filling out that survey. So just, if you can, please fill that out. It really helps us. We also want to make sure that you're aware of the NNLM Code of Conduct. Just a reminder, we're all here together professionally. We want to be inclusive and respectful, and we really appreciate your cooperation. We have the Code of Conduct available on our website, and we're also going to put a link in the chat for that if you want to read the whole thing. Let's see. So now that I have gone through those items, I'd like to welcome our speaker for today. So Dr. Stephanie Basey is a freelance rural health researcher who is passionate about demystifying research and making it more accessible to the broader community. With a PhD in rural health sciences from Mercer University School of Medicine and a Master of Health Sciences in Healthcare Quality from George Washington University, Stephanie brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the field. As a rural health researcher, Stephanie's primary mission is to unravel the intricacies of rural healthcare and shed light on critical issues. Her research interests span various domains, including understanding how individuals interact with food, exploring farmers' mental health, and addressing the pervasive issues of weight bias within the medical field. So, with the introduction behind us, welcome, Dr. Stephanie Basey. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here, and everyone, thanks for being here with me today as we talk about navigating food insecurity and understanding the complexities of the food environment and what that means for us. As Carolyn mentioned, I'm a rural health researcher, and my research interests focus on identifying how people interact with their food environments. This was actually part of my dissertation work, and so I'm happy to be here to share it with you. When we to get started, you've seen the presentation objectives. So I want to highlight kind of what this presentation is going to look like. We'll talk about the food environment and then the related concepts. We'll talk about how to identify food environments, have a thought exercise, and then talk about ways that we can measure the food environment using a model, and then end with practical implications for understanding our food environment. On the bottom right of the screen, there are 3 little icons, and I wanted to give you some notes notice about when maybe I'll be asking you questions, and you'll see that with a question mark, or when there should be a link available in the chat for you. It's the little link icon. And I also have 2 book recommendations, so you'll see when those are coming. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the topic we're talking about today, hunger and food insecurity, is sensitive and personal, and it might invoke uncomfortable feelings, and that is totally okay. And your emotional response to this is valid. But if you find yourself feeling uneasy or that you need to talk to someone, please reach out. You can send a private message to me or any of the co-hosts, and we'll be happy to listen and support and connect you with resources if needed. I also want to point out that hunger is a pervasive issue, and it reaches far beyond our stereotypes and preconceived notions about hunger. Hunger and food insecurity affect individuals and families across diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, and it's often a silent crisis, but it impacts families in all communities. Millions of people in the US don't have enough food to eat, or they can't access food. And food insecurity impacts 100% of US counties. Learning about our food environment will help us craft solutions to improve hunger and food security. I mentioned it earlier, but I want to let you know that this was the topic of my doctoral dissertation, and the data that you'll see at the end of the presentation was collected as a part of that project. And our host, Carol Ann Curry, was on my dissertation committee. I would be happy to share my dissertation if you're interested in reading it, and I would welcome your feedback and thoughts. And I put my email address on the screen, and I mean it. Please email me and let's continue the conversation. And before we get into it, I want to make the distinction between local and global perspective of food environments. Today, we'll be talking about local perspective, and that's focusing on food environments in the US. The global food environment is influenced by a lot of really complex factors like socio-political factors, war, political instability, and other things that really significantly impact food access and availability. Excuse me. There are things like humanitarian emergencies, famines and refugee crises, which demand rapid response to provide food aid and to ensure long-term food security for affected populations. So these global markets are interconnected and really complex. So we'll be focusing on the United States, but I don't want to be naive in thinking that the United States does not experience its own challenges related to humanitarian crises or disasters or political and social unrest. So we're going to talk about the general food environment, and just know that in those situations, they require specialized community-specific interventions that are tailored to those immediate needs. But for this presentation, let's think of it generally. Okay, so the food environment. The generally accepted definition of the food environment includes physical, economic, policy, and social cultural surroundings, opportunities, and conditions that influence people's food choices. This definition changes based on the discipline of the person using it. It can cause different interpretations and applications, and the definition is always expanding to incorporate new elements. But currently, when we talk about a food environment, we're talking about the surroundings and conditions that affect people's access to, availability of, affordability of, and choices about food. You may have noticed that household or individual characteristics are not included in this definition. And this concept primarily focuses on those external factors surrounding individuals and communities that influence food choices and access. And I think that's an oversight. According to that definition, the food environment would look something like this. There are restaurants and grocery stores, businesses, churches, and other social gathering spaces. It would include those factors that influence the availability, accessibility, affordability, and quality of food in neighborhoods. But how do we know the food environment is good for the people living there without understanding how people interact with it? Can we measure what works if we don't have input from residents? Understanding the dynamics of the food environment and its link to security can lead to the creation of healthier, fairer, and more sustainable food access programs, initiatives, and policies. Ultimately, this will improve food security and chronic hunger through community well-being, informed decision-making, equity and social justice, and sustainable food practices. Ultimately, a supportive food environment contributes significantly to the overall well-being of communities, which will enhance the quality of life and promote social cohesion as well as health. Okay, so about some related concepts. The terms food security and hunger are related, but they're not interchangeable. Often, though, we'll hear those terms used interchangeably because they're so closely associated and they're very complex to measure. But it's important for us to recognize the distinctions between them. So food insecurity represents a broad range of experiences, which can include chronic and acute issues related to food access, while hunger specifically refers to the physiological condition resulting from food intake, insufficient food intake. But how we define hunger, it's really difficult because it's not just about the absence of food, it's a spectrum of experiences. So we can all experience hunger, we can all feel hunger, but we might not all experience chronic hunger to a point of malnutrition or worse. And since our relationship with food is personal and it varies, capturing data that we can generalize is really challenging. So after pointing out how different these two terms are and that we should keep these terms different, I want to throw some more confusion in there and say, because it's such a difficult to measure concept, food insecurity is often used as a proxy. So for the rest of this presentation and the model at the end, food insecurity will be used as a proxy to measure hunger. And to do that, we use the USDA's, the Department of Agriculture's Household Food Security Scale. And that's the most common tool used to measure food insecurity. There's a link in the chat leading you to the USDA's website with information about the scale and how to use it. This scale categorizes households into different levels of food security based on their responses to a set of survey questions, from very low food secure to high food security. Though some drawbacks about this scale are it's self-reported, so there may be bias associated with that. There's limited context. We can get a snapshot of that household in the moment, but it lacks context, and it doesn't really go into the root issues of why someone may be experiencing food insecurity. It also doesn't take into account situational factors, cultural differences, or household and individual factors. So these are some additional concepts that you might be familiar with already. Food justice involves the equitable distribution of food and also addressing systemic issues related to social, economic, and racial disparities in food systems. So there are two books that I would like to recommend if you want to learn more about food justice and the systemic disparities that may impact that. The first is a book called Black Food Matters, Racial Justice in the Wake of Food Justice. And it's a series of essays edited by Dr. Ashante Reese and Dr. Hannah Garth. And it looks at Black food culture and offers new ways to think about access, privilege, equity, and justice. The second book is called The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. It's by Richard Rothstein, and it details the role that the government policy plays in segregation. Links to both of these publisher pages are available in the chat. And if you've already read either of these books, please share your thoughts in the chat. I also want to say that I'm not affiliated with either of these books. I read them and they've made an impact on me. So other concepts. Food desert. A food desert is an area where residents have limited access to affordable and nutritional food, typically due to a lack of grocery stores or other retail food stores in a certain geographic distance. A food swamp is an area where there is food available, but it's mostly in the form of fast food restaurants, convenience stores, and other retail food stores that sell high-calorie, low-nutrient foods. And then those stores outweigh the healthier food options. And there's also a food mirage. Excuse me. A food mirage is an area with the appearance of food, but availability or access to that food is misleading or deceptive. We often see these in gentrified areas where as an area is being gentrified, grocery stores or markets are coming into the area, but the cost of the food is more than the historic residents can afford to pay. So it looks like there's food available in the area, but people may not be able to purchase that food. I'm sharing these definitions with you, these specific definitions with you today, but I want you to know that there's not a universally agreed upon definition for these terms. And just like food environment, different disciplines, researchers, organizations use different or varying criteria to categorize these areas, so it can lead to some inconsistencies in literature or data points. And while it may seem simple or straightforward, it can actually be quite complex. For example, an area can be both a food desert and a food swamp. And I think it's important to note that these concepts do not account for the experiences and perceptions of people living in the area. So the local experience is not taken into account and might not align with these categorizations given by these external factors. So here are some tools that we can use to identify the food environment. And identifying or measuring our current food environment is the first step to impacting hunger and food insecurity. By measuring them, we can gain an understanding of the existing challenges, disparities, and opportunities related to food access. By assessing them, we can develop targeted interventions and policies that address communities' specific needs. And these tools on the screen are often used to identify areas classified as food deserts and food swamps. And each of these tools is focused on counting the number of food stores in a geographic area. For example, the retail food environment calculates the ratio of fast food restaurants and convenience stores to grocery stores and markets in a specific area. The higher the retail food environment index is, it indicates an unbalanced food environment skewed towards unhealthy options. A common belief is that providing physical access to food will decrease hunger or improve food security. Many studies use these tools to identify areas that might benefit from a grocery store or other food sources. But other people, myself included, ask, does physical access to food impact food insecurity? So let's do a thought exercise that can help us work through this. Because we're all on mute and there's such a large group of us, we'll do this by ourselves. If you're with a group of people, you're welcome to talk through it. And if you're alone, just consider it on your own, but you're also welcome to share your thoughts in the chat. So imagine you're hungry with no other food at your disposal. And I give you this bag of uncooked raw rice. It's free, no strings attached. What would you need to be able to eat this rice? And with what you have available to you right now, wherever you are, could you satiate your hunger? Just take a few moments to think about it. So if you thought about it, what do you need to cook rice? You probably thought, well, you need clean, drinkable water, potable water. You need some sort of energy source, like a microwave or stove or fire, and the fuel for that. You probably need a pot, a pan, or some sort of utensil to cook it in, and then measuring tools and utensils. Do you have those available to you now? But some things that maybe you haven't considered is that you would need time to cook the rice. And rice takes time to cook. You would need the physical ability or the ability to be adaptive to maneuver in your cooking space. You would need knowledge of how to cook the rice. How long does it take? The rice to water ratio and various techniques. You might have cultural or dietary preferences that would impact how you cook it or what you cook it with. And you must be able to eat solid foods or the ability to modify the rice in a way that you can eat it. Now, this is not specifically about cooking, but there's some other really important considerations about rice. Rice must be cooked. Eating raw rice can make you sick. It can cause food poisoning. And rice must be kept at specific temperatures, so above 140 degrees Fahrenheit when you're serving it, and below 40 degrees Fahrenheit when you're stored. And rice is only good for 3 to 4 days. It should only be reheated once. So if I give you this large bag of rice and you made a big batch of it, do you have a place that you can safely store it at the right temperature so you can enjoy it later on? So I don't know this for a fact, but I would assume that some of the people on the call, even if I gave you this free food, would not be able to eat it with the resources that you have right now. But it's not unique to rice. So this is some commonly donated food items. There's pasta and cereal, canned goods. Could you eat this can of black beans right now? You probably would need at least a can opener. This one doesn't have a pop top. And then the other question is, would you want to eat this can of beans right now? If I gave you this bag of pasta, could you eat it? The question that we can ask is physical or geographic access to food enough? Is it good enough to have food available in the food environment, or do we need more? Access can be interpreted in various ways, but the most common definition is the availability of food in a certain geographic area. Think back to food desert, measured by the number of retailers in a specific area. But what could happen if we consider how the person and their household interact with that food environment? So this is the same image that we had before, but this time the person and the household are at the center of it. So let's do some more questions to consider. If a person lives within walking distance of a grocery store, but the store's hours are 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, and the person works 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, does the person have access to that store's food? They're in physical proximity of it, but can they access the food? If a person who relies on food assistance programs lives within walking distance of a grocery store, but that grocery store does not accept EBT or SNAP benefits. SNAP benefits is a supplemental nutrition assistance program, formerly called food stamps. If the grocery store does not accept EBT or SNAP benefits, does the person have access to the food in the store? And another one to consider. If a person who's a vegetarian lives within walking distance of one restaurant and only that restaurant, but it's a barbecue restaurant that cooks all of their vegetables with animal byproducts, does that person have access to food? So reducing chronic hunger and improving food insecurity is about more than just ensuring people can access food. It's making sure that people can also prepare and eat the food that they can physically access. So let's talk about how we can measure the food environment and consider those experiences and the perspectives of people in the households that are impacted. The first is a survey and community assessment. And these involve gathering direct feedback from residents about their food environment experiences. Questions can encompass access, maybe even that geographic access, their distance to the closest grocery store, food preparation and how they can consume food. But it may minimize the focus on the proximity to the food stores. And these surveys allow for the development of initiatives, programs, and interventions that address the root causes of food insecurity in that community. You can also collaborate with local organizations. So these initiatives involve partnerships with food banks, community groups, healthcare providers, so that it will allow for a comprehensive exploration of the food environment at the community level. It helps us gain a deeper understanding of the social, cultural, and economic factors that influence food access, preparation methods, and dietary choices. It also will allow for development of tailored initiatives and interventions, ensuring a more effective and inclusive approach. So if the people that we would like to participate in our interventions are a part of developing those interventions, they may be more likely to participate. And I told you this was my dissertation work, so I want to share with you that this is what that survey can look like. This is a model, and you can use this or create your own, that assesses how people interact with the food in their physical or geographic areas. So point out some things here for you. In the middle, it says food environment. but food environment is a latent variable and you can't directly measure it. So we'll have to use food insecurity again as a proxy for that. But there's different variables here to consume, to access, and to prepare. In this study, the consume variable was not a significant predictor of food insecurity. But alone, just looking at that portion of the model, all of the factors align to one variable, meaning that it's not a significant predictor of food insecurity, but it can be a valuable tool for community efforts and to allow communities to understand, are there issues in their community with people consuming food? But then when we look at the model, including access and preparation, I get excited about this because we are able to predict households that may be food insecure. Using this model, we can predict households that may be food insecure. This means that if we know which household factors predict food insecurity, we can develop programs, initiatives, and interventions to improve the risk factors, so the things that put people at risk for being food insecure, and we can support or strengthen the protective factors, those factors that stop people from possibly becoming food insecure. And what we see here in this model is that as households' ability to access food increases, their food security decreases. And as the household's ability to prepare food increases, their food insecurity decreases. Now, remember, we're using food insecurity here as a proxy for the food environment. Now, I do want to be clear that this model does not establish causality of food insecurity in households. It's just a tool that can be used to help predict it. So looking closer at the variables, these are the factors that are used to make the variables access and prepare. And while it's not significant, I'm leaving consume up there because I want you to see what was included in the survey to ask people how they can consume food. Here's where things get interesting. You may have noticed something missing, something you expected to see in the access variable that's not there. Excuse me. That's distance to the closest grocery store. In this model and in this sample of Georgia residents, distance to the closest grocery store was not a significant predictor of food insecurity. Things that were are income as a percent of the federal poverty line, if the household's annual income was sufficient to support the household, if their transportation was reliable, and if they were able to afford fruit and vegetables. Other things that were predictors of food insecurity are if they could physically cook food, if they had a safe place to store food, a safe, clean place to cook, a safe, clean place to prepare, and safe ways to dispose of trash and waste, and if they had the necessary tools they needed to prepare food. So these are some results from the Georgia study, and it's not appropriate at this point to generalize them to the nation because the sample is only Georgia residents. But it is interesting that the odds of food insecurity were nearly 30 times higher for households that could not afford fruit and vegetables. And if we looked just at rural households, it was over 14 times higher. The odds of becoming food insecure were about 10 times higher for households where the annual income was not enough to support their household. And in rural homes, that was about 13 times higher. If their household income increased, it was associated with nearly a 78% decrease in the risk of the odds of becoming food insecure. There's a typo on that slide. That is supposed to be food insecure. Distance to the closest grocery store and transportation reliability were not significant predictors of food insecurity. But when we look at only rural households, for each increase in transportation reliability, there was a 90% decrease in the odds of being food insecure. And in rural households, not the general population, but in rural households, those that did not have the necessary tools to prepare food were over 15 times more likely to be food insecure. The strongest predictors of food security were the ability to afford fruit and vegetables, having an annual income that's enough to support the household, having a safe place to cook and store food, and having safe trash and waste disposal. So what are the practical implications of this? By identifying the factors that directly contribute to food insecurity in our communities, in our populations, we can use a model like this to identify focus areas to improve the food environment, reduce hunger, and improve food security. For example, in this sample, distance was not a significant predictor of food insecurity. So another factor, such as fruit and vegetable affordability, could become a priority area in community improvement. And that can look like a lot of initiatives, like maybe from a government side, providing subsidies and incentives so they can subsidize local produce, provide subsidies to local farmers, making it financially viable for them to sell their produce at lower rates. There could be financial incentives to grocery stores or farmer markets or other food retailers to lower the cost of fruit and vegetables on their side, or provide tax breaks or incentives to businesses that stock and sell fresh produce at affordable prices. Another option is supporting local farmers. So this could be a community-led initiative or something that's started by the government or banks or business. And that's providing low interest loans or grants to farmers, allowing them to expand their operations and increase the supply while maintaining affordability, or offer technical assistance and agricultural training to start smaller farmers to increase their yields. There's also food recovery programs. One option is to organize gleaning programs where volunteers collect surplus produce from farms, which reduces waste and provides fresh fruit and vegetables to food insecure families. Or food redistribution, which is establishing systems for taking surplus or unsold fruits and vegetables from retailers and providing them to charitable organizations, ensuring that no edible produce goes to waste. So from the survey, we were able to identify that the odds of becoming food insecure when you could not afford fruits and vegetables were very high. So practically, we can come up with initiatives that can change that. I want to share this with you. These are two programs that I'm currently involved with, but these programs both happened before this study did. So I just want to be clear that the study did not start these programs. But the first is at a Centenary United Methodist Church. Under their names, I've put their Instagram tags if you would like to learn more about these programs. But what you see here in this first picture is the back of someone's car where they have picked up fruit and vegetable donations and they're bringing it back to the church to stock their community fridge and to also support their free breakfast that they offer every Sunday. They have a community fridge that is non-denominational. Anybody can access it 24 hours a day, no questions asked. We also go to a food transportation company in Vidalia, Georgia, which is about an hour and a half from Macon, every week, and pick up food that would be otherwise thrown away or destroyed, and it's still edible and safe to eat, and we bring that back to Macon, part of that redistribution system. The other picture is of our Macon community fridge. This also happens to be behind a church, but it's not really affiliated with that church. It's a free pantry and fridge that anybody can access 24 hours, and community members like myself stock it with donations or things that we buy and fill ourselves, cook ourselves. So that is the end of this presentation. But what I hope is that from hearing some of this information that you might be thinking about ways that you can consider what access looks like in your communities, and if there's a way to maybe implement interventions or programs, or thinking about interventions or programs that may be beyond just someone's physical proximity to a grocery store. So if there are any questions, I would be happy to take them now.
So thank you, Dr. Basey. Thank you so much. What I'm going to ask, we have a few people adding questions now. For those that have questions, please feel free, drop those in the chat. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen a little for a moment to give our attendees just information about how to claim their MLACE. So while those questions are trickling in, we can see how to get your CE. But yes, I just want to make sure everyone know. Okay, so yes, so we've got, okay, thank you, Carolyn. Carolyn put the link to how to the survey and how to redeem your MLACE. So it just a heads up, if you're not a member of MLA, you can still get a certificate for you know, filling out the survey and answering the questions. So if you have any questions about how to redeem your MLACE, please you know, let us know or shoot us an email at nnlm@uw.edu. Yep, Carolyn put that in the chat also. So let's see, we do have a question. I'm going to pivot back to questions now. So Elena says or asks, is there any correlation between access to nutritious food items and the decrease of independent groceries?
Elena, think that is a very interesting question. The first point I think is interesting is the adding nutritious food items there. And I think often there is a question about what can or should be donated and what that can look like depending on the person who needs the donation. But currently, in my knowledge, there is not work that looks at the size or the type of retailer in the area. And I think specifically to the decrease of that. When you look at the very specific definitions of like a food desert, it changes the definition based on the size of the grocery store. But I'm not sure that there's been any work done to see what donations or what access look like before or maybe after those stores closed.
Thank you, Stephanie. We just have some comments. Callie says she's seen the little free pantries. That's a good suggestion that can openers could be provided at these. Kathy has a question. Any numbers on the percent of people in the US that are food insecure?
Yes. The last report was in 2000. I think the last numbers they used were in 2019. And it shows that there were, in 2021, 10.2% of households were food insecure at least some point in the year. So 10% of US households. And at least almost 4% were what they considered very low food insecure, which is about 5.1 million households. And so that's looking at households and not specific people. And so I don't have the numbers for both, but I would be happy to put a link in the chat to get that information.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I have a question that's kind of maybe a loaded question because I know the answer to it, but I'm just curious. So when there's so many various terms and definitions, and you noted throughout your presentation that there is not necessarily like a standard definition for several of these, you know, these phrases, these topics. How did that impact when you did your literature search? Like, how did you go about, because I'm a librarian and we have several librarians here, and I think that would just be interesting to hear how you navigated that.
Yes. So when I started I started my PhD program with an idea. I've always been interested in the food environment and how people interact with food. And so as I went through the program, I was narrowing my scope more and more. And as I was narrowing my scope, I realized there's not a lot of literature out there, or I just didn't know how to find it. And so it's actually Carol Ann was on my committee because of her ability to help me find literature that would guide this research. And it was only after I asked this very seasoned librarian, is it out there and I'm just missing it? And she said, no, I can't find it either. Is when I was like, yes, like, so this really is a gap in our knowledge and something that we can work towards. But I would read an article and then email Carol Ann and say, I can't find this anywhere else. Am I missing this? And that cycle just kept happening. And earlier I mentioned the global perspective versus the local perspective. And so if you're looking at just what's happening kind of locally, the research really, or the scope of what's available really narrows. But when you look globally, there's so much out there. But because the definitions really are not standard, it can be really difficult to navigate those things.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I like to share that with fellow librarians. Just one thing that I've always, if you're a reference librarian, you might encounter this also, where students or faculty come to you when they can't find anything, and they're almost like they feel defeated. And I've always tried to turn that around to like, well, this is a good opportunity. We've looked, there's nothing out there. There's definitely some room here for some research if this is your topic. And I was very proud that Stephanie found that there wasn't anything, and then she created some stuff. So she's added to the body of literature. So let's see. We have
but I would
another
not
question.
have been as confident without the support and the validation from Carol Ann, from the librarian, saying, no, you did your best, and there is a gap.
And it wasn't just me. You probably
That's
experienced this at your libraries. It's like if someone can't find something, a librarian can't find something, anecdotally we'll be like, can you find anything? And like, it's just kind of like an interesting point of discussion for the day. Like, can someone find anything on this? Okay, we have another question from Noelle. Do you have any resources on how to start organize a Gleaners program as a community member? And she commented that it's frustrating to see all the fresh produce just going to waste.
So yes and no. I don't have anything with me that I can share right now, but I do have resources that I could gather, and I could send it maybe to our hosts, and if that gets sent out as a follow-up, if that would be okay.
We can do that if you.
Okay. Yeah, so there are a number of resources. I would also be happy to put you in contact with people who have done this. And then to say there's one thing that I think might stop a lot of people from cooking and putting food in the fridge is the idea of like, what if I cook something and then people get sick? Am I liable? So there's a great resource about your liability as someone who might cook or prepare or purchase food for a community fridge. And I'll make sure to include that as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we just Frank has shared with us some information about a local community group in the chat. Okay, and Callie has shared one, so that's great. We have lots of resources.
And I think what's great is I love seeing these things because it truly is. I'm very active at the community fridges, and if you've never had to maybe go to a food bank or some sort of food assistance program, I'll tell you it can be very intimidating and scary, and can be a barrier to stop people from asking for help. But often at those places, you need to give things like your name and your identification information, and maybe you don't feel comfortable in engaging in a way that you have to give so much of yourself to be able to receive that food. So seeing that these other groups and these things have started, it's nice to see those, and those are the comments that we get from people who maybe don't have IDs to sign up for SNAP benefits or things like that. So the community movement is very important when you're trying to just kind of put these foods into the communities.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let's see, Letty has shared that they have a food pantry. Yeah, this is something interesting that I was interested about when Stephanie and I were doing, or when I was helping Stephanie do her research, is about food insecurity in colleges. So students have dorms, but they don't include kitchens, and then they're giving things like pasta and rice, and they don't have any way to cook it. So yeah.
So I have data. My study was focused on Georgia, but data that's really astounding about food insecurity on college campuses and how that skyrockets after students are no longer required to live on campus and purchase meal tickets or meal plans. But what's, I think, even more interesting is in all of the searching we did, we only found 2 studies of all of the universities in Georgia that looked at the food insecurity of college-age students. So there's a lot of space to investigate that. There's a lot of space to look at the impact of hunger and food insecurity in all ages. That's great. Seeing all of those things about the food pantries on campus, that's wonderful.
Yeah, lots of good resources. Carol would like to know what inspired your research.
I have I've had some personal impact with food and what food meant to me personally, myself, and that's what I started looking at food insecurity. I did not experience hunger or food insecurity growing up, but I thought, well, this surely can't be a problem after I read one article, and then I tried to find more and reading more, and it just kind of turned into like there's a gap somewhere. Something feels like it's missing. And then I found our Making Community fridge. And the more that involved I was with that, the more stories I heard and the more work that I did in that space, I realized that there are actually gaps. There are spaces where we can fill that. I also want to go back, if I can, to that book, point out the book Black Food Matters. That book really changed my perspective about what food was and how people access food and how different it is for people from different cultures or have different backgrounds or different experiences. So if you get a chance to read Black Food Matters, it's a series of essays, please do. It really opened my eyes to different experiences and then what it meant in different parts of our country to be food insecure or to experience those things. So my research was just inspired by like reading an article and realizing this didn't seem complete. There must be more out there, and then following that path. And someone earlier mentioned the book, The Color of Law, and how frustrating it was to read. Every chapter I read, I would get more frustrated about it. So thank you for sharing your experience with that book as well.
All right, okay. So Carolyn has a question about what foods are the best to donate to food pantries.
This is a great question. And it really depends, it really depends on your food pantry. So if you have like a free pantry or one of these small community fridges or community pantries, things that are easy to open, easy to eat, and I might suggest not having the nutritional value of the food as one of your top concerns. Sometimes we might infantilize people who are food insecure, or because we're giving need, we want them to have something that's really nutritious, but sometimes people just want a cookie. So things that you like to eat, they might like to eat. But when you're donating to an operation, maybe like an established brick and mortar food pantry, they might have limitations on things that they can and can't accept. So if you want to donate to them, it might be best to call them first. But I think things that are always accepted would be like complete meals. So if you buy hamburger helper, you may also want to donate the milk and the butter and the other thing, the meat that need to go with that hamburger helper. But some places don't allow donations of raw meat. So it really depends. But things that are easy to carry, easy to eat, and are tasty, those are the best donations.
Thank you. Yeah, Claire mentioned food pantries around her area that usually list the kind of items that they need. So yeah, I think that's something to look out for also.
If I can also mention, I brought this up about rice because I just think it's so interesting. I eat a lot of rice, but it's interesting. I think I didn't know that you could only reheat rice once, or that raw rice could make you sick if it's not cooked as it should be, those kinds of things. But rice is a staple food. It has a low it has good carbohydrates. It's easy to digest, and it's easy to make into something that's really tasty. So I do not want to villainize rice donations. But if you are going to donate rice, it might also be nice to donate things that can go along to spice up the rice as well, like tuna packets or things like that.
Hey, I don't see any other questions.
That's right.
Yeah, we have
something I didn't mention. Thank you for putting that in there. Is the food should never be expired. I frequently will go through and clean out my pantry, things that maybe I bought but I don't really intend to eat. And that's okay. You can clean out your own pantry and bring those foods to the fridge or to the donation centers. But you should make sure that it's not expired, that if it's a can, it's not dented or damaged, and that it's labeled. And it should have an expiration date. So everything should be safe to consume, not dented or damaged, and labeled. So something else that's really good, I'm sorry, I was just reading Michelle's comment about, is there a list of foods that would be good in those like little pantries? So something that we do a lot for our community fridge is we buy in bulk and then put them in like Ziploc bags. So I might buy a large bag of pretzels and then put them in smaller Ziploc bags and just write pretzels and the day that I put the pretzels in that bag. So those little baggies of chips, those are really expensive. But you can do something very similar for a fraction of the cost. And truly, well, like Claire said, I think we should only donate foods that we would eat. If it's something that you would like to eat, that's what you should donate. Also consider things that are high protein or in carbs, because those things stay in your belly longer and can help you feel fuller longer. And oftentimes people don't know when their next meal will come. So having something that's high in protein or high in carbs can help them feel satiated longer.
So yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Carolyn put the chat or the link again for the evaluation in chat, and I'm gonna put Stephanie's email in there again. If you'd like to reach out to her. And then I also just on the screen just wanted to let you know at this moment we don't have another session scheduled for the PNC MLA Health Equity and Diversity Speaker Series, but when we have our next speaker and topic identified, we will post it to the training calendar, so you can check this link out. And this session has been recorded. We will make it available. It takes a little bit of time, so about 3-ish weeks. But you can also at this link see recordings of past sessions. So yeah, and we've got some great comments. But yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and please take my email address and let's continue this conversation. I'm happy to talk about this all the time. I thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody.